Hello, I'm Chris Alvarez and welcome to Spacewalk's Money Talks, where we talk about the business, policy, and technology behind space exploration and commercialization. We're on the web at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. Thank you for listening. I'm speaking with Dale Skran, Chair of the Executive Committee of the National Space Society. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Chris.
So first, tell me, what is your background in the field of space?
Well, professionally, I'm an electrical engineer with a master's degree from University of Michigan. I worked at Bell Labs for 17 years, and then I held executive positions at 3 different startups, actually technically 4, but Ascend Communications, Sonus Networks, and a company that I founded myself called CMware. As I like to say, we're a lot like Pandora, but a lot less successful. So that's my career. And I've also been very active as a volunteer in the National Space Society. I had sort of 2 epochs in my career. I was originally a member of the L5 Society and the National Space Institute before the merger to form the National Space Society. And in the 80s and the early 90s, I had many roles. I was on the regional board of the National Space Society. I was the president of the North Jersey L5 Society. I was the editor of the Space Actors Handbook for 3 years. So I did a lot of things. I could talk more. Then I kind of went into space activism retirement, starting in 1997 when I joined Ascend Communications, which was, let's just say, a famously difficult company to work for. A very long hours, very difficult, very challenging, and eventually bought by Lucent Technologies for $24 billion. And then, I worked at Sonus Networks and eventually started my own company. And around about 2008, I sold CMware, and it was not that successful, I would say. I decided to go to an ISDC, an NSS International Space Development Conference. I hadn't been to one in a long time, and there was some chap, Elon Musk, giving a speech, and he was launching rockets, and I said, wow, something is really happening here. This is a lot different than I remember. A lot of stuff's going on. I got excited about it, and I kind of re-involved myself in the National Space Society. I started out as the deputy chair of the policy committee. I'm really interested in space policy and political activism in support of space. I became the chair of the policy committee and the executive vice president, who in NSS is in charge of policy. I did that for a number of years. And then recently in May of 2019, I became the chair of the executive committee, and which is the person who has overall responsibility for managing the society. So that's kind of my background in space. I'm not a space professional, not really. I'm a professional volunteer, I suppose. I've never made any meaningful sum of money off of space activism. I may have been paid for a couple of articles I wrote, but that's about the size of it.
So, what would you say the Space Society? What levers can they pull to make things happen? What's their impact?
Well, we have, I'd say, 3 fundamental kinds of levers that we pull. One is, the most direct one is our legislative activism. We do have at this time, actually, I think had a lot to do with this. We have a full-time DC rep who represents us on the Hill and in hearings and so on. We also do 2 legislative events annually. One of them is called March Storm, and the other is Fall Fury. March Storm is usually in the middle of March, and we bring in people from all over the country to march the Hill and talk with Congress people and senators. And then the Fall Fury is a home district activity. It's actually going on right now. We used to just do it in August, but now we extend it all the way from August to December. And we organize citizens to meet with representatives of their home districts. So that's one way that we try to influence things. And we formed an alliance with other like-minded groups. We call it the Alliance for Space Development. It's got a website you can check out. I think there's 15 501c3s in the group, The main partners in that is the Space Frontier Foundation, but also includes the Mars Society, the Moon Society, Students for Exploration and Development in Space, Space Tourism Society, and a bunch of others like Lifeboat Society, Space Renaissance, and so on. And we together define an annual legislative agenda. We typically have 3 to 4 objectives per year. And actually, for a number of years, I was the NSS representative to the board of directors of the Alliance for Space Development. Although just recently I've had someone take that over for me. So our goal in the AST is to have trackable, actionable milestones. It's not just NASA should have a few more $1 billion, and I could certainly talk in more detail about that. I think it's been very successful. I'm extremely pleased with that. We started it in 2015, and I think we have a really good record. We publish an annual report card, and if you go to our website, www.allianceforspacedevelopment.org, you can find the report cards for each past year, what we actually achieved in terms of legislation. So I'm kind of losing track of the next question. I think, what are the 3 things, the 3 levers that we have?
Right.
So that's one lever. Another lever is education. We do quite a few educational events. I think the most important one is the Space Settlement Contest. We have 10,000 students that participate in it every year. We also have a Space Settlement Competition, which is a little different, a little more intensive. It has a large number of students as well. They typically come together at our annual conference, the International Space Development Conference. We've also recently started some debates on space governance at that event. So we're trying to reach out to students to inspire them to be participants in our future in space. I'm actually really pleased. One of the leading engineers on SpaceX's Mars City team was, in fact, the winner of our Space Settlement Contest just a few years back. So I think that's kind of a direct influence we're having. And then the third way we influence the things is through our conferences and magazine. We publish Ad Astra 4 times a year. It's won a lot of awards. We try to use it as a way to kind of provide thought leadership. We also have the International Space Development Conference, which is a big tent conference. We try to reach out to the moon, to Mars, to business, to students, to all sorts of groups. It's a multi-track conference. It's quite a bit bigger than some of the other space conferences. We have a lot of famous people. Administrator Bridenstine was at the last one. The one before that, Jeff Bezos was our guest of honor. And he announced the renewal of The Expanse. And we also had the whole cast of The Expanse there. So it's a really exciting event. So those are we also have something we call the Space Settlement Conference or Space Settlement Summit. And that's an invitation-only event. We're having it next week at Caltech. And it's intended to be like an annual high-level discussion of what we can do to advance the cause of space settlement. So those are our 3 ways of doing things.
Would you say, considering the limited number of funds available for any kind of space research or activity, space-based activity, is there any tension between, say within the government, dollars for deep space research and telescopes and that sort of thing, the science, versus trying to commercialize space, trying to get private industry more into it? Is there any kind of tension there?
Well, there's always some tension, and I think there are some individuals who view this as a zero-sum game. That any dollar that's not spent on science is like taken right out of the hands of the scientist and stuffed in a capitalist pocket or something. We don't look at it that way. We think that a robust commercial space business or a robust activity, we like the phrase thriving economy in space, will lower the cost of doing business in space, lower the cost of getting to space, lower the cost of doing things on the moon and Mars, and will make science more affordable and more ubiquitous. And I think we're seeing that happening. We've already seen significant increase or decreases in launch costs because of commercial space activity, I think we're poised to see a significant, much greater, further decrease in costs and a real explosion in things over the next 5 years. So, I mean, there's certainly those who see that conflict. We don't see it.
Okay. What challenges in space business, technology, or policy are you most concerned about, and why?
Policy-wise, I think that there are four concerns that I have. One, of course, is space debris. We've been very active in the area of space debris. If you look at the NSS website, space.nss.org, you'll see we have quite a number of position papers on space debris. We've been very active, I think, in creating thought leadership. And in fact, I would modestly claim that a lot of what the government's doing now is simply taken from our old position papers. Just is not well known, but it's true. But it is a very important issue, and I think you don't have to be a member of the Green Party to recognize that if there's a Kessler event, our future in space will be truncated. It's in everybody's interest to make sure that there is no Kessler event. Planetary protection, I think, is an area of challenge. I think there's a conflict, especially in the case of Mars, between what people like Elon Musk want to do and what some scientists may want to see happen. And I think the fundamental challenge is that you can't prove a negative, right? Right now we don't know there's any life on Mars. We've spent quite a bit of time looking for it. We could spend 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. We might still never find any life on Mars, but it still might be there. And the question is how long are we going to wait before we send a human to Mars? How long are we going to wait before we build a city on Mars? And is it possible that we're not actually going to find any life on Mars or even fossils of life on Mars until we actually send humans to find them? This is going to be a big issue over the next 5 years, and it is going to become more and more salient in the public eye. So that's certainly an issue I'm concerned about. I think one of our agenda topics is to try to make space development and settlement part of the fundamental law that governs NASA. And we've been struggling to do this for some time with varying degrees of success in different parts of Congress. Like I say, we've had success. We've had bills introduced. We haven't quite put it across the threshold. But it is something, I think the average American thinks that NASA is trying to settle space, but that is simply not true. NASA is not doing that at all. And NASA is pretty much 100% focused on space exploration and a little bit on space commercialization.
Okay.
And we'd like to change that so it's a little more balanced. We also feel that space settlement, besides providing a permanent, sort of ongoing rationale for humans in space, the kind of research that's needed right now to make space settlement a reality would also be tremendously beneficial on the Earth. I mean, what you need to have a space settlement is organic, high-intensity, low-water agriculture. And that's extremely valuable on the Earth,
right? Yeah.
Especially in cities or desert areas. And the research is pretty much exactly the same research. So you can just take whatever you did for the settlement and put it into New York or Detroit or Dubai or wherever you want it. So it's something to keep in mind. It's not well understood. And I think the fourth challenge is that, we have an upcoming presidential election here, and there's actually been some significant success in advancing commercial space over the last, say, 8 years or so. And there's been something approximating a bipartisan policy, and that's not well known. But I mean, we just had an authorization bill come out from the Senate, I believe, either today or yesterday, and it's bipartisan. The Democrats are together. Cruz and Sinema are both arm in arm embracing it, and that's wonderful. But there's a real chance that after this election, this will all get washed away, and there'll be a big setback for a lot of commercial activities in space. So, depending on exactly who wins and exactly what their policies turn out to be. So that's certainly something, and our approach is to have a bipartisan space policy. We engage equally with Democrats, Republicans, and all other parties.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to make the case that space is something that it's an American issue. It's not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the policy challenges that I see.
Do you see any challenges that, and this is kind of a relative question, but that could easily be fixed or addressed if people put their minds to it?
I think the kind of challenges that could be most easily fixed is things like airspace management. Right now, there's a growing conflict between airplanes and rockets, especially in Florida,
mm-hmm.
and that's because of the really quite antiquated practices of basically shutting down the airspace over Florida when there's a rocket launch. Mm-hmm. And that greatly interferes with the airline's activities and profitability. And this is not a sustainable way forward. I think it's fairly obvious what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. But it's just a question of the airlines and the airline pilots kind of acknowledging that people are going to be flying rockets, they're going to be flying them more often, mm-hmm. and that we need to have an airspace management system that takes that into account. And we have to stop having a situation where every time a rocket flies, that it's just you're shutting down this mammoth corridor of airspace for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. So I think that could be solved, but it's also a very important issue. I think another issue that is relatively straightforward to solve is there's a lot of regulatory hurdles surrounding remote sensing, and it's relatively difficult to get permission to do remote sensing. And this is something that it's ultimately regulatory issues are anything that doesn't require money, that just requires bureaucrats to write new regulations, mm-hmm. is at least potentially easy to solve. Now, politically, it may be difficult. That's another matter.
Right. Have you encountered any issues on this subject that people aren't talking about that you think they should be talking about?
Well, I mentioned planetary protection earlier. I think that we're starting to see a dialogue on planetary protection, and NASA put out a report recently that was very constructive. Mm-hmm. And also, I would applaud the National Research Council. They put out a fairly extensive report recently, and put forward the idea that there should be zones on Mars, for habitation, for resource development, for science, that are basically preserves. Mm-hmm. But I think the idea, the conflict, is with certain individuals who basically see everything off the Earth as a totally pristine nature preserve where no one but a few elite scientists will ever tread. Mm-hmm. And that's totally antithetical to the National Space Society's vision of millions of people living and working in space. We see space as the future of humanity, mm-hmm. and not a future for a few elite astronauts, but for basically anyone who wants to go there. And that's not compatible with making space an eternal nature preserve. Mm-hmm. And it seems a little bit bizarre, but there's even those who are concerned about contaminating the moon, even though we know the moon is totally dead. And I think it's obviously there's always going to be historical sites that need to be protected. In fact, NSS has been active in working with a group called For All Moonkind to preserve the historical sites on the moon, the Apollo landings and so on. We think that's important, but that's not the same thing as turning the entire moon into a nature preserve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that sounds like it could seriously stymie efforts to support private industry to go out and try to commercialize space.
Yeah, absolutely.
What excites you most about space?
I'd say there's just no question. The thing that I'm personally the most excited about is commercial space. I think the prospect of having activities in space not be dependent on the vagaries of the congressional whim or the whims of the exploration. There's been a lot of back and forth in the NASA budget. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to go to the asteroids. We're going to go to Mars. We're going to go back to Mars. I mean, sometimes it seems like they spin one of those magic 8 balls and pick a target every few weeks or something. It's really not good, and it's refreshing to see the focus of private actors who want to do things in space, whether it be simply to make money or to build a city on Mars. They don't spin an 8 ball every week and decide on a new plan. They may change their tactics, but they're still trying to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to get away from the fact that SpaceX and Blue Origin are enormously exciting. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at my screensaver right now. It's a picture of the SpaceX Starship under construction. Mm-hmm. If Starship is anything, even a quarter of what it's claimed to be, it will be a revolution of unprecedented proportions. And so it's extraordinarily exciting. It's also being done very transparently so that citizens can observe what's happening in a way that's very unusual in the aerospace industry. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not being covered very much by the mainstream press. One of my hobby horses, I think one of our hobby horses, is that the mainstream press has, to a first order, stopped covering space at all. I mean, every once in a while there's something discovered, like the recent spacewalk with 2 women got some decent coverage. Mm-hmm. But I go sometimes to do talks on colleges, and it's shocking. I mean, some people actually believe NASA has been shut down. They're not even aware there's a space station. They're not even aware American astronauts are in the station. So it's really sad, the ignorance, the massive public ignorance about space that exists. The other thing I'm really excited about is, I would say, asteroid exploration. This is a grand time to be, if you're interested in asteroids or asteroid mining. Right now we have OSIRIS-REx and Hayabusa 2, both exploring asteroids at the same time. It's a fantastic, incredibly exciting set of events to follow. NASA has 2 new probes, Lucy and Psyche, also for asteroids. Also coming up very soon, very, very exciting probes. One to an all-metal asteroid, one to the Earth-Sun Trojans out around the orbit of Jupiter, some of the oldest asteroids in the solar system. Mm-hmm. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is cool. Something you talked about a little bit just a couple minutes ago. Yeah, the Artemis program doesn't seem to be generating the public excitement that I would have hoped for. It seems that it's kind of, I guess the public attitude seems a bit anemic, but maybe I'm comparing it to the wrong things. I don't know. I'm worried about that excitement not being there.
So this is a complicated and sensitive matter. So, I mean, it's great that a lot of interest is being focused on the moon. NSS is extremely excited about the so-called CLPS, Commercial Lunar Payload Services. That program, that NASA program, is pretty much the perfect program from our point of view. They're paying a bunch of commercial providers to do sort of high-risk landings on the moon and then providing scientific payloads, including the Viper payload to look for lunar follicles. It's just a wonderful example of the kind of thing NASA can do, done right, and it's probably going to be low cost and high reward. There will be risks, there will be missions that fail, but it's a fantastic program. And I think that, it's to some degree motivated by the Artemis program. Unfortunately, there's a tension between doing things on a schedule, meeting a mission, and having a sustainable, cost-effective program for returning to the moon. You see that all the time. And in fact, in these 3 lunar programs that are proposals for lunar landers that where we expect to see, as you know, the Blue Origin has their so-called national team, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, and Blue Origin, which is sort of a compromise. It's a 3-part lander to be launched on 3 different commercial rockets, and uses the gateway and all that. It has the I think the advantage that it could potentially exist in a post-SLS world. Then we have the Boeing proposal, which is a sort of space launch system on steroids. Everything is all SLS, nothing commercial.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's expected, it may not happen, that SpaceX will bid the Starship as a landing vehicle. And that's the revolution. That's the completely new way that would basically sweep everything else aside if it works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that discussion I just went through shows the tension that that there's the old way, which is just Apollo on steroids. There's the new way, which is what SpaceX is trying to do, and then there's the compromise way, which is what NASA is trying to move forward on. And I think you can see that it's difficult to get really excited about this kind of a sort of camel by committee architecture with these kinds of tensions. Where on one hand you have people trying to build something inexpensive, reusable, commercial. On the other hand you have people who are basically just trying to sustain a workforce someplace. In terms of excitement, I think this is it's a recruiting problem for NSF, because if you're a young person and you're excited about space, it used to be that you could work at NASA, or you could join a group like National Space Society and go to meetings and watch slideshows and all that. But if you're a young person now and you're excited about space, there are hundreds of startups you can go work at where they will pay you money and you will do exciting stuff. And if you really think you want to live on Mars, going to work for SpaceX is probably what you want to do. I think the first people that are going to live on Mars are SpaceX employees right now. And, that was not true. When I was like 25, that was not true. Okay? It's true now. And, it's not just SpaceX. There's dozens of other super exciting companies doing just amazing things. And Made in Space, Nanoracks, Rocket Lab, Planet, just Spire, you can go on and on. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of VC money coming in. It's a whole new world.
Interesting. Now, you touched on this a little bit already, but what advances do you expect to see in either space exploration or commercialization in the near term? Do you see any expect any big jumps?
Yeah, I kind of am, actually. There's three things I think that are potentially the biggest jumps. I mean, one I talked about a bit is the Starship and really Starlink as a combined thing. So this is a bet. Just sort of a burn your ships and charge the castle thing that Elon Musk is doing. He's going to give up on Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy and do something completely new that he wants to be so much cheaper and so much better that he's obsoleting his own products. And having Starship will enable Musk to launch the 30,000 satellites to Starlink at a very, very low cost, more than anyone else could possibly do it. And I was just reading an article today that the Air Force has already started using the Starlink satellites in orbit to provide data to jet planes, and they're providing 600 megabit links to jet planes. And that's unprecedented. There's never been any capability like that before. And it's not well understood, I think, but Starlink, with its satellite-to-satellite laser links, can actually beat fiber optic times across the Atlantic by 20 to 30%. So, if this happens, which it may not, SpaceX will not just become the leading rocket company, it will become the leading ISP in the world. And you can just see where it kind of goes from there. Right. So, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. And that's just in the next 5 years. I'm just talking about the next 5 years here. The next thing I think is really exciting is, I call it CubeSat a go-go, or the growth of the venture class satellite. People who are putting together satellites to launch less than 1,000 kilograms, whether that's with small rockets like Rocket Lab Electron, or with ride shares. Now we've seen SpaceX is going to do, I think annual or quarterly ride shares or something. Very exciting. I think a lot of student projects are going into orbit, which never would have happened 20 or 30 years ago. And, for a couple $100K, you can build a CubeSat and you can put it into orbit. I got a nephew at Brown. They've done a satellite. They have a club that built a satellite. So this kind of stuff never used to happen. It's like a whole generation of people for whom space is not working. It's not about walking the halls of Congress or having a table at a science fair or working at NASA. It's about we're going to go in the lab and build a satellite and launch it ourselves. And that's a different world.
Yeah.
A different world. And then I think the third thing is LEO commercialization. There are 3 companies competing to make fiber optic cables in space, in LEO, made in space, FOMS, and I forget the name of the third one. There was just an article out today that said FOMS had successfully, manufactured some Z-band cable. The whole idea is it turns out that there's a particular substance called Z-band. You can look it up on the internet if you're interested in what its chemical formula is. But if you manufacture something out of Z-band and zero-G, it has much lower dispersion, which means it can carry a lot more data for a much longer period of time. So there's 2 wins with Z-band cable. One is that you can get a lot more data over the same cable, but the real win is security, because you can go for a long period of time without a repeater. Fiber optic cable can't be tapped except at a repeater. So the holy grail is you get one cable across the Atlantic Ocean. It's untappable, and so this is a big deal. This could be the first real business where people fly materials into space, manufacture something, bring it back to Earth, and sell it. There's a lot of exciting research in like printing tissue, printing hearts, growing blood vessels in orbit. I'm hopeful that we'll see a real revolution in commercial activity in low Earth orbit. Another thing that is incredibly exciting is the Northrop Grumman Cygnus platform. We're now in a situation where we have 2 Cygnuses in orbit, the 11 and the 12, and Cygnus has been redesigned in the new version to have its own momentum wheel and be able to operate as a free flyer. So it can potentially go away from the space station, do some manufacturing, come back to the space station, unload product. This could be a revolution in space manufacturing. So I'm extremely excited about that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. And definitely something that could, it's always good to, profit will always push people to try harder. And it sounds like there's a lot of profit there.
Yeah, there potentially is.
Potential, yes. Yeah. Where can people find you on the web?
Okay, the way to find me on the web is to go to space.nss.org. And, you'll find me as one of the NSS leaders. That's my bio. If you do want to contact me, it's dale.skran, DALE.SKRAN, @nss.org. And I urge everyone listening to join the National Space Society. It's a great organization. It's a great organization for students, for adults, for anyone who's interested in space. We like to think of ourselves as the Big Ten. We like the moon, we like Mars, we like the asteroids, we like free space. What we like is humanity's future in space. And I invite everyone listening to join me on that journey.
Yeah, I do too. I invite them all to look into this. All right. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening. The best way to support this podcast is to rate it on Apple Podcasts. You can get more information at spacewalksmoneytalks.com. You can also follow us on YouTube at Spacewalks Money Talks, on Instagram at Spacewalks Money Talks, on Facebook at Spacewalks Money Talks, or on Twitter at Spacewalks MT. Thank you for listening.